The solid gold pen slid across the linen paper. Julian Blackwood didn't look at the digits. $15,000. It was the third check that week. The office perched on the 40th floor was an aquarium of glass and silence. No sound from the city could breach these walls. Only the barely audible hum of the central air conditioning, keeping the temperature at a clinical, constant cold. Julian set the pen down. The metallic click against the mahogany desk was the only noise in hours. He picked up the envelope addressed to Mount Rose Clinic, Switzerland. He sealed it with the precision of a man closing a coffin. No family photos on the desk, just contracts. And that envelope. To the world, Julian Blackwood was the man who bought failing companies and turned a profit before breakfast. To himself, he was just a ghost paying for the privilege of not haunting his own son. For his own good, he whispered. The voice came out raspy, rusted from disuse. He stood up and walked to the glass wall. Down below, Chicago was a carpet of indifferent lights. He pressed his forehead against the freezing glass. The phone vibrated on the desk. Ping. Julian hesitated. Verna's messages were always the same. Complex medical reports. Psychiatric terms he didn't understand. Psychotic episode. Risk of self-harm. Need for total isolation. He unlocked the screen. This time, it wasn't a report. It was a photo. He is getting better, Julian. The Alpine air is working miracles, but the doctor says he still can't speak to you. A father's voice is too strong a trigger. I sent this photo so you can sleep in peace. He is sleeping like an angel. Julian looked at the image. A white room. Immaculate sheets. Leo, small and fragile, curled up under a thick duvet. His face was turned into the pillow, hidden. Only his brown curls were visible. Julian felt that familiar knot in his stomach, that toxic mix of relief and guilt. He was paying. The boy was safe, far away from him, far away from the monster Verna said Julian was to the child's psyche. He was about to lock the screen. He was about to go back to his whiskey and his silence, but his thumb stopped. Something about the light in the photo bothered him. The light coming through the window was orange, sunset. But if the clinic was in Switzerland, and it was 8 p.m. in Chicago, in Switzerland it would be 3 a.m, pitch black. Julian frowned. He zoomed in on the image. The light came from a street lamp, filtered through a cheap curtain. No, it couldn't be. He zoomed in closer. The pixels blurred, but the shape became clear. In the right corner of the photo, there was a full-length mirror leaning against the wall. A mirror Verna, in her rush or arrogance, had forgotten to check. In the reflection, there were no Swiss Alps. There was a narrow hallway with peeling wallpaper, and at the end of that hallway, a tiny figure. He wasn't in bed. He was on his knees. Julian gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. The figure in the mirror wore a gray t-shirt 2 sizes too big for his skinny body, and he was holding a dirty rag. He was scrubbing the floor. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. He slid his finger to the side, looking for more details in the reflection. Next to the kneeling boy, there was a black trash bag, and sticking out of the bag, a crushed pizza box with a red and yellow logo. Tony's Pizza, Southside Chicago. Julian's heart, which had beaten in a slow, dead rhythm for years, gave a violent jolt against his ribs. Switzerland, the Alps, state-of-the-art treatment. The pizza box was from a diner 40 minutes away. He looked at the $15,000 envelope on the desk, then he looked at the reflection of the boy scrubbing the floor. Julian Blackwood didn't scream. He didn't throw the phone against the wall. He set the device down gently on the glass desk. He pulled back the leather chair. He sat down. And for the first time In 8 years, his eyes weren't empty. They were focused, cold, and absolutely lethal. He opened the locked drawer of his desk. He took out a car key he hadn't used in a decade. A black, discreet, armored sedan. He picked up the envelope with the check. He tore it in half. Slowly. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the silent office. "Rip." "Verna," he said to the empty room, "you made a mistake." Julian stood up. He didn't straighten his tie. He just walked out. And the sound of his footsteps on the marble hallway wasn't the sound of an executive going home. It was the sound of a war beginning. The garage gate of the Blackwood Tower rose with a mechanical groan that echoed against the concrete walls. Julian's black armored sedan slid out into the Chicago night. The rain wasn't just falling. It was attacking the city. Sheets of water hammered against the windshield, blurring the lights of the skyline into streaks of neon blood. Inside the car, it was dead silent. The soundproofing was so advanced that the storm outside felt like a silent movie. Julian gripped the leather steering wheel at 10 and 2. His hands were steady, but his knuckles were white. Straining against the skin, he checked the GPS screen. The blue line traced a path he had never taken, not once in 8 years. He was leaving the loop. He was leaving the world of doormen, heated sidewalks, and 7-figure salaries. He pressed the accelerator. The engine growled, a low, powerful baritone that vibrated through the floorboards and into the soles of his Italian shoes. As he drove south, the city began to shed its skin. The glass skyscrapers vanished, replaced by squat brick buildings that looked tired and huddled together against the cold. The bright white LED streetlights of the financial district faded. In their place, old sodium lamps cast a sickly, jaundiced yellow glow over the wet pavement. Julian watched the transition through the bulletproof glass. He passed a luxury car dealership, its windows gleaming. 3 blocks later, he passed a cash for gold store with iron bars over the door. He passed a gourmet organic market. 5 minutes later, he passed a liquor store where a man was sleeping in the doorway, covered by a wet piece of cardboard. The contrast wasn't just visual, it was physical. The road beneath the car changed. The smooth asphalt of the north side gave way to potholes that jolted the sedan suspension. Every bump was a reminder that he was entering a place where the city didn't care to pave over the cracks. Julian loosened his tie. The silk felt like a noose. For 8 years, he had signed checks. He had believed the emails. He had trusted the PDFs with the logo of the Mount Rose Clinic. He had bought the lie that his money was buying peace. But as the car navigated deeper into the labyrinth of the South Side, the truth was settling in his stomach like lead. "Turn right in 500 feet, the GPS voice announced. Her voice was calm, detached. She didn't know she was guiding him into a nightmare. Julian turned onto Oak Street. It was a narrow artery of row houses, some well-kept with flower pots, others abandoned with boarded-up windows that looked like blackened eyes. He slowed the car to a crawl. The rain had turned the street into a river of slush and oil. He scanned the house numbers. 408, 410, and then 412. Julian killed the headlights. He let the car roll forward a few more feet before putting it in park. He killed the engine. The silence inside the car broke. The sound of the rain returned, drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof. He stared at the house. It wasn't a clinic. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a decaying 2-story structure that looked like it was exhaling its last breath. The siding, once white, was now the color of a bruised sky, peeling away in long gray strips. The gutters hung loose, dripping water onto a porch that sagged dangerously to the left. But the house wasn't dead. It was alive. Every window on the first floor was blazing with light, even through the rain and the sealed car windows. Julian could hear it. The thump, the rhythmic, heavy vibration of bass. Thump, thump, thump. It shook the rearview mirror. Julian looked at the digital clock on the dashboard, 8:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. This wasn't a home. It was a nightclub masquerading as a residence. He opened the car door. The smell invaded his personal space instantly. It was a thick, cloying mixture of damp rot, cheap menthol cigarettes, and overflowing garbage cans. Julian stepped out. His right foot landed squarely in a deep puddle of freezing mud. The cold sludge seeped over the rim of his shoe, soaking the expensive sock, touching his skin with an icy kiss. He didn't pull back. He didn't look down. He pressed his foot deeper into the mud, anchoring himself. The cold was good. The cold was real. It woke him up. He closed the car door. The heavy thud was swallowed by the music coming from the house. Julian didn't walk to the front door immediately. He moved to the side, stepping over a discarded tricycle that lay on its side in the overgrown grass. A relic of a childhood, rusting in the rain. He approached the large bay window of the living room. The curtains were drawn, but they were thin, cheap fabric that did nothing to hide the silhouettes inside, and there was a gap, a 2-inch slice of visibility between the panels. Julian stepped into the flower bed, his shoes sinking into the soft, wet earth. He leaned in. He put his eye to the glass. The heat radiating from the window fogged the glass slightly. He wiped it with his gloved hand, and then he saw. The living room had been gutted. The furniture wasn't arranged for comfort, it was arranged for a party. A massive 60-inch television dominated the wall, blasting a music video. The room was crowded. Maybe 15 people. Bottles of liquor, Grey Goose, Hennessy, Patron, covered the coffee table. Julian recognized the labels. He recognized the prices. He calculated the total cost of the alcohol on that table. It was more than the monthly rent for a place like this. And in the center of the chaos, sitting on a plush velvet armchair that looked brand new, was Verna. She looked nothing like the grieving, overwhelmed grandmother she played on the phone. She was wearing a silk dress that shimmered under the recessed lights. Gold necklaces layered around her neck caught the light, flashing like warning beacons. She held a wine glass in one hand and a cigarette in the other. She threw her head back, laughing at something a man in a leather jacket whispered in her ear. Smoke curled from her lips, drifting up toward the ceiling stained with nicotine. Julian felt a vein in his temple pulse, a slow, dangerous rhythm. He watched her pour wine for the man. It was a vintage red. Julian squinted. He knew that label. He had a case of it in his cellar. It cost $200 a bottle. His money. Every sip she took was his money. Every ring on her finger was his money. Every vibration of the bass shaking the walls was funded by his guilt. But where was the boy? Julian pressed his face closer to the cold glass. He scanned the edges of the room. He looked past the dancing bodies, past the smoke, past the greed. He didn't see Leo. Panic, sharp and sudden, spiked in his chest. Had he been wrong? Was the boy actually in a clinic? Was this just Verna spending her salary? Then the kitchen door at the back of the room swung open. The laughter inside the room didn't stop, but for Julian, the world froze. A small figure emerged from the kitchen. Leo. He was balancing a large, round serving tray loaded with bowls of snacks and a fresh bucket of ice. The tray was almost as wide as his arm span. His arms, thin as twigs, trembled under the weight. He wasn't wearing pajamas. He wasn't wearing warm clothes. He was wearing a stained gray t-shirt that hung off his shoulders, exposing his collarbones. His shorts were frayed, and on his feet. Julian looked down. The boy was barefoot. Leo navigated the crowded room like a soldier moving through a minefield. His eyes were wide, darting left and right, anticipating impact. He wasn't looking at the guests with curiosity. He was tracking their movements to avoid being hit. He reached the coffee table. He struggled to lower the heavy tray. As he set it down, a plastic bowl of chips slid off the edge. It hit the floor. Clatter. A small spill. Maybe 10 chips. Nothing. A trivial accident. The music didn't stop, but Verna did. She stopped laughing mid-sentence. Her head snapped toward the boy with the speed of a viper. Julian saw her mouth move. He couldn't hear the words through the double-pane glass, but he saw the shape of them. They were sharp, ugly. She pointed a manicured finger at the floor. Leo flinched. It was a small, practiced movement, a recoil of the neck, the way an animal flinches when it knows pain is coming. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He didn't look for sympathy from the guests. Leo dropped to his knees instantly. He began to pick up the chips with frantic speed. Using his small hands as scoops, he was terrified. Not of the mess, but of the time it was taking to clean it. One of the male guests, the one in the leather jacket, laughed and kicked at the boy's hand, playfully, cruelly. Leo pulled his hand back, cradling it against his chest. He looked up at Verna. Verna didn't defend him. She rolled her eyes. She took another sip of the $200 wine and turned her back on her grandson. Julian Blackwood stood in the rain, the water soaking through his cashmere coat, turning the fabric heavy and sodden. He watched his son. He watched the boy he had stayed away from for 8 years to protect. He watched him picking up crumbs from a dirty rug while strangers laughed at him. Julian pulled back from the window. His reflection in the glass was dark, shadowed. But beneath the shadow, something had broken. The wall he had built around his heart, the wall of logic, of distance, of financial support, had crumbled into dust. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, not from the cold, but from a rage so pure, so white-hot, that he felt dizzy. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He bypassed his cell phone. He didn't need the police, not yet. The police filled out forms. The police took statements. The police were slow. Leo didn't have time for slow. Julian pulled out a pair of black leather gloves. He pulled them on, one finger at a time. The leather stretched tight over his skin, a second skin. He looked at the front door of the house. The paint was chipping. The wood looked soft, rot eating at the frame. He didn't walk back to the driveway. He walked through the mud of the front yard, his expensive shoes ruining the grass, marching in a straight line toward the porch steps. He climbed the wooden stairs. They creaked under his weight. He stood in front of the door. He could feel the bass thumping against his chest now. It synced with his heartbeat. He didn't look for a doorbell. He didn't check if it was unlocked. Julian Blackwood raised his gloved fist. He didn't knock like a guest. He didn't knock like a billionaire. He hammered on the wood with the force of a battering ram. Bang! 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 The sound cut through the music. It cut through the laughter. Inside the house, the noise died instantly. Julian lowered his hand. He took a breath of the cold, wet air, and he waited. The echo of Julian's fist hitting the door didn't just fade, it hung in the humid air like a threat. Bang, bang, bang. Inside the house, the heavy bass of the stereo was cut abruptly. Someone had panicked and pulled the plug, or maybe just hit pause. The sudden silence was violent. It was louder than the music had been. Julian stood on the porch. The rain hammered against his back, soaking the cashmere coat until it weighed 10 pounds. He didn't shiver. He didn't move. He stared at the peeling white paint of the door, his breath forming small, angry clouds in the freezing night air. He counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. He heard whispering inside, scuffling feet. The sound of glass clinking against glass. They were scrambling. like cockroaches when the kitchen light flicks on. Then the deadbolt slid back. Click. The sound of metal grinding against rusted metal. The door swung open. It wasn't Verna. It was the man in the leather jacket, the one who had been laughing, the one who had kicked at Leo's hand. Up close, he looked rougher. His eyes were glassy, red-rimmed from smoke and cheap vodka. He held a half-empty beer bottle loosely in his left hand, using the door frame to support his weight. He was big, broad-shouldered, used to intimidating people in this neighborhood. But he wasn't used to men like Julian Blackwood. The man squinted into the darkness of the porch. He saw a figure in a soaking wet coat, face shadowed by the gloom, expensive leather gloves clenched into fists. "Yo," the man grunted, his voice thick with unearned aggression. "Party's private, man. You got the wrong house. Get lost before I—" Julian didn't let him finish. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He simply stepped forward. Julian moved with the inevitability of a glacier. He stepped into the man's personal space, his wet shoulder brushing against the leather jacket. The physical intrusion was so confident, so absolute, that the man instinctively stepped back. He stumbled. His beer sloshed over his hand. Julian crossed the threshold. He was inside. The transition was instant and nauseating. Outside, the air had been clean, cold, and wet. Inside, the atmosphere was a physical assault. The heat was cranked up too high, creating a suffocating tropical humidity. The air was thick, textured with the smell of stale cigarette smoke, spilled alcohol, heavy cologne, and the underlying sweet rot of old drywall. It smelled like desperation masked by perfume. Julian stood in the small foyer, his shoes caked in mud pressed onto the cheap, warping laminate floor. He looked up. The living room was frozen. It was a tableau of guilt. 15 people, strangers, parasites feeding on a host they didn't know existed. They were frozen in mid-motion. A woman holding a cracker, a man reaching for a bottle, a couple on the sofa pulling apart. 30 eyes turned toward the intruder. They saw the suit. Even wet, the cut of the fabric screamed money. They saw the watch. They saw the posture. This wasn't a cop. Cops carried badges and shouted. This was something worse. This was the landlord, the owner, the consequences. Julian ignored them all. He treated them like furniture. His eyes scanned the room. A slow, mechanical sweep, left to right. He saw the 60-inch TV, still glowing with the paused image of a rap video. He saw the buffet table loaded with shrimp and steak, food that Leo probably hadn't tasted in years. And then he saw her. Verna was standing by the coffee table. The wine glass was still in her hand, but it was tilting dangerously. Red wine threatened to spill onto the beige carpet. Her face was a study in structural collapse. For a second, she didn't recognize him. Julian Blackwood was a voice on the phone, a signature on a check, a ghost she kept at bay with lies about Swiss clinics and psychiatric episodes. He wasn't a physical reality. He wasn't supposed to be here. She squinted, her mouth opening to form a question or an insult. Then the recognition hit her. It started in her eyes. The pupils dilated, swallowing the iris. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a magic trick. Her skin went from flushed pink to a sickly gray paste. The wine glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the carpet. Thud. It didn't break, but the red liquid splashed out, looking violently like blood against the pale fabric. "Julian?" she whispered. The name sucked the air out of the room. The guests exchanged looks. They knew the name. Verna had bragged about him, the investor, the cash cow, the fool. Julian didn't answer her. He didn't acknowledge the question. He took another step into the room. Water dripped from the hem of his coat. creating a trail of dark spots on the floor. Drip, drip, drip. "Where is he?" Julian asked. His voice wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. It was a voice that didn't need volume to command attention. It was the voice he used to fire CEOs and dissolve partnerships. It was cold, flat, and hard as granite. Verna stammered. Her hands flew up, fluttering nervously like dying birds. "Julian, you can't be here," she said, her voice pitching up into a shrill, hysterical frequency. She took a step toward him, trying to block his view of the kitchen, trying to become a wall. "The doctor! The protocols! You know what Dr. Weber said. If he sees you, he'll have a break. He's fragile, Julian. He's in the clinic. He's in Switzerland." She was lying. She was lying to his face, standing 5 feet away from him while the smell of her lie filled his lungs. She was still trying to sell the script. She was so committed to the con that she couldn't stop, even when the stage was burning down. "Switzerland," Julian repeated. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He reached into his pocket. Verna flinched, thinking he had a weapon. The man in the leather jacket tensed up. Julian pulled out his phone. He unlocked it. He turned the screen toward her. The photo. The selfie she had sent him 20 minutes ago. The mirror in the corner. "Switzerland looks a lot like your living room, Verna," Julian said. Verna looked at the phone. She saw the mistake. She saw the reflection. Her mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The illusion shattered. There was no more script. There was just the naked, ugly truth standing in her living room in muddy shoes. Julian didn't wait for an explanation. He stepped around her. She tried to grab his arm. "No! Julian, listen, it's not what you think. He's just visiting. He came back early because—" Julian pulled his arm away. He didn't shove her. He just jerked his limb with a sharp, violent motion that broke her grip. She stumbled back, hitting the coffee table. He walked toward the kitchen, toward the back of the room, toward the place he had seen in the reflection. The guests parted like the Red Sea. They backed away. They backed, pressing themselves against the walls. They didn't want to be near him. They could smell the violence radiating off him, even though he hadn't thrown a single punch. Julian reached the edge of the living room. There was a small alcove near the kitchen door, a shadowed corner where the light from the overhead chandelier didn't quite reach. Julian stopped. He looked down, and there he was, Leo. The boy hadn't moved. When the door had opened, when the stranger had entered, when Verna had dropped her glass, Leo hadn't looked up. He had done what he was trained to do. He had made himself small. He was curled into a ball on the floor, tucked between a potted plant and the wall. His arms were wrapped around his head, protecting his ears and face. He was shaking. A fine, continuous vibration that made his oversized t-shirt ripple. He wasn't shaking because of the cold. It was blazing hot in the room. He was shaking because of the noise, the shouting, the tension. He thought he had done something wrong. He thought the silence was his fault. He thought the big man at the door was there to punish him for the chips he had spilled. Julian looked at his son. He looked at the matted hair, dull and unwashed. He looked at the bruises on the boy's elbows, old ones, yellow and green, fading into the skin. He looked at the bare feet, the soles black with dirt. This was the dangerously unstable child Verna had described, this terrified, malnourished bird of a boy. The rage that Julian had felt in the car vanished. It was replaced by something much heavier, a sorrow so profound it felt like his chest was collapsing. He had paid for this. Every check, every wire transfer, every moment he stayed away for Leo's own good. He had funded this torture. He was the architect of this prison. Julian fell to his knees. He didn't care about the mud. He didn't care about the wet coat. He dropped to the floor, putting himself on Leo's level. The sound of his knees hitting the laminate startled the boy. Leo flinched violently. He pressed himself harder into the wall, trying to merge with the plaster. "Don't hit me," Leo whispered. The voice was tiny, cracked. It was the voice of an old man trapped in a child's throat. "I picked them up," Leo whispered into his knees. "I picked up all the chips. I promise, Aunt Verna. I didn't eat any." Julian stopped breathing. "I didn't eat any." The boy thought he was being punished for stealing food. Julian reached out a hand. His gloved fingers hovered in the air, trembling. He wanted to touch the boy's shoulder. He wanted to pull him close, but he was afraid. He was afraid that if he touched him, Leo would shatter. "Leo," Julian said. His voice broke. The iron control was gone. The billionaire was gone. There was only a father in the ruins. "Leo, look at me." The boy went still. He knew that voice, or he thought he did. It wasn't Verna's screech. It wasn't the drunken slur of the guests. It was a voice from a dream, a voice he heard in his head when he was hiding in the basement. Slowly, painfully slowly, Leo lowered his arms. He turned his head. He looked at the man kneeling in the mud beside him. He saw the wet coat. He saw the dark skin, the same shade as his own. He saw the eyes. Leo didn't smile. He didn't cry out, "Daddy," like in a movie. He frowned. He squinted, confused. "You're not real," Leo whispered. He reached into his pocket and squeezed something hard. "You're the dream again." Julian swallowed the lump in his throat. It tasted like bile. "I'm real, Leo," Julian whispered. He pulled his glove off. He needed skin-to-skin contact. He needed to prove he wasn't a ghost. "I'm real." He reached out and gently, so gently, brushed a stray curl of hair away from Leo's forehead. Leo didn't pull away. He leaned into the touch, just a fraction of an inch, starved for warmth. Behind them, Verna found her voice. "Get away from him!" she screamed. The spell broke. Verna rushed forward, her heels clicking frantically on the floor. She grabbed Julian's shoulder, her fingernails digging into the wet cashmere. "He's sick! You're triggering him! You're going to kill him!" she shrieked, playing the card she had played for 8 years. "Get out! I'll call the police! I swear to God, Julian, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Julian didn't stand up. He didn't look back at her. He kept his eyes locked on Leo, but his hand, the hand that wasn't touching his son, moved. He reached up, grabbed Verna's wrist, and squeezed. He didn't squeeze like a human being. He squeezed like a hydraulic press. Verna gasped. Her scream turned into a choked gurgle of pain. Julian turned his head slowly. He looked at her, and for the first time in her life, Verna saw what true evil looked like. It didn't look like a monster. It looked like a father who had just realized he had nothing left to lose. "Call them," Julian whispered. The room went dead silent again. "Call the police, Verna," Julian said, his voice vibrating with a terrifying calm. "But tell them to bring a coroner. Because if you touch him one more time, they're going to need one." Verna rubbed her wrist. The red marks from Julian's fingers were already blooming against her pale skin, vibrant as a fresh burn. She stumbled back, putting the coffee table between herself and the man she had milked for 8 years. Her chest was heaving, not from exertion, but from the frantic calculation of a predator who suddenly realizes the cage door is open and the tiger is loose. She looked around the room. Her eyes darted to the guests pressed against the walls. She needed an audience. She needed witnesses. She needed to turn this narrative around before the truth took root. "You see?" Verna shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Julian. "You see what I have to deal with? This is why I kept him away. He's violent. He's a maniac." She looked at the man in the leather jacket, the one who had kicked Leo. His name was distinct in Julian's mind now, though he hadn't spoken it. He was the enforcer, the muscle. "Ray!" Verna yelled at him. "Are you just going to stand there? He assaulted me. He broke into my house. Do something!" Ray pushed himself off the wall. He set his beer bottle down on a side table with a deliberate clink. He cracked his knuckles. He was big, heavy with muscle and fat, fueled by liquid courage and the need to protect his source of free alcohol. But Julian didn't look at Ray. He didn't look at Verna. He didn't look at the crowd of parasites watching the drama with the hungry eyes of reality TV addicts. Julian only looked at Leo. The boy was still on the floor. He hadn't moved since Julian released Verna. He was freezing again, stuck in that terrible limbo between flight and freeze. Julian noticed the details now, the details that a photograph could never show. He saw the way Leo's collarbones jutted out against the thin gray fabric of his shirt, sharp enough to cut. He saw the grime under the boy's fingernails, not the dirt of a child playing in the garden, but the deep, ingrained grease of someone who scrubbed floors and cleaned stoves. And he saw the tremor. It wasn't just fear, it was metabolic. The boy was starving. On the table behind them, a platter of shrimp cocktails sat sweating in the heat. A pile of untouched roast beef sliders grew cold. The smell of the food was heavy in the air, a cruel perfume taunting the child sitting 3 feet away from a feast he was forbidden to touch. "Leo," Julian said softly. He kept his voice low under the frequency of Verna's screeching. "When was the last time you ate?" Leo's eyes flickered to the food. A reflex, a hungry animal checking a trap. Then, immediately, his eyes shot back to Verna. "I didn't steal anything," Leo whispered again, his voice trembling. "I was just cleaning up the chips. I didn't eat them, I swear." The denial broke Julian's heart into dust. The boy had been conditioned to believe that his hunger was a crime, that eating was theft. "He lies," Verna cut in, stepping forward but keeping a safe distance. "He lies all the time, Julian. That's part of the sickness. He steals food and then he throws it up. Bulimia. It's a symptom of his condition. That's why he's so thin. We try to feed him, but he rejects it." She was improvising, building a medical defense out of thin air, gaslighting a father about his own son's starvation. Julian stood up. The motion was fluid, controlled. He rose from the floor like a dark tide rising. He turned to Verna. "You said he was in Switzerland," Julian said. "You said he was receiving nutritional therapy. You billed me $6,000 last month for specialized dietary supplements." He took a step toward the buffet table. He picked up a plate. It was a paper plate with a festive pattern, a birthday party plate. "Is this the therapy, Verna?" Julian asked, gesturing to the room full of drunk strangers. "Is Ray here the therapist?" Ray stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Watch your mouth, rich boy. Verna's a saint. She took this kid in when nobody wanted him. She's been raising him while you were busy counting your money." "Raising him?" Julian laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "She's not raising him. She's erasing him." Julian looked down at Leo again. The boy had moved his hand. He was reaching into the pocket of his frayed shorts. He was clutching something tightly. His knuckles were white. It was a defensive gesture, an anchor. Whenever Verna yelled, whenever the big man Ray stepped closer, Leo squeezed whatever was in that pocket. Verna saw Julian looking. "What do you have there?" She snapped at Leo. "What did you steal? Empty your pockets, now!" Leo curled into a tighter ball. "Nothing. It's mine." "There's nothing that is yours," Verna shouted. "Everything you have I gave you. The clothes on your back, the roof over your head. Empty your pockets or I'll have Ray shake you upside down." Leo let out a small whimper. Julian stepped between Verna and the boy. He turned his back on the woman, presenting a wall of broad shoulders and cashmere. "Show me, Leo," Julian said gently. "She can't touch you. I won't let her. Show me what you're holding." Leo looked up. He searched Julian's face for the lie. He looked for the trick, but he only saw patience. Slowly, Leo pulled his hand out of his pocket. He opened his fist. Lying in the center of his small, dirty palm was a wreck of metal and glass. It was a pocket watch, or what was left of one. The gold plating was scratched and worn away, revealing the dull brass underneath. The glass face was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, held together by Scotch tape that had yellowed with age. The chain was missing, replaced by a piece of shoelace tied in a knot. But Julian recognized it instantly. It was an antique Waltham, 1920. He had bought it in an auction 10 years ago. He had left it on his nightstand the night his wife died. In his grief, he had swept everything off the table in a rage. He thought he had thrown it in the trash. He thought it was gone, lost in the debris of his collapsed life. Verna snorted. "That piece of junk? He dug it out of the garbage years ago. He carries it around like an idiot. I told him to throw it out 100 times. "It's not junk," Leo whispered. He ran his thumb over the cracked glass, a gesture of pure affection. "I fixed it." Julian knelt down again. He brought his face close to the watch. "You fixed it?" he asked. "The spring was broken," Leo explained, his voice gaining a tiny bit of strength as he talked about the machine. "And the little gear, the escapement. It was bent. I used a paperclip, and I used oil from the door hinge." Leo turned the crown on top of the watch. Click, click, click. Inside the battered case, something miraculous happened. The tiny, damaged heart of the machine began to beat. Tick, 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 tick. The second hand, slightly bent, jerked forward. It moved. It kept time. "It works," Leo said, looking at Julian with eyes that begged for validation. "It keeps time. I thought if I fixed it, maybe the owner would come back for it." The air left Julian's lungs. The boy hadn't just fixed a watch. He had been trying to fix his family. He had been trying to repair the broken mechanism of his father's love using paper clips and hope. Julian reached out. His hand was shaking uncontrollably now. He touched the watch. He touched the boy's hand holding the watch. "It's the best repair job I've ever seen," Julian whispered. A tear, hot and heavy, escaped his eye and tracked through the dust on his cheek. "It's perfect, Leo." Verna didn't like the silence. She didn't like the emotion. It felt dangerous. It felt like she was losing control of the narrative. "Oh, for God's sake!" she yelled. "It's trash! He's hoarding trash! Give me that!" She lunged forward. She didn't aim for Julian. She aimed for the boy. She aimed to snatch the watch, the one thing that gave Leo a sense of self, and crush it. It was a mistake. Before her fingers could touch Leo's hand, Julian moved. He didn't stand up. He didn't need to. He simply caught her wrist again, but this time he didn't just hold it. He twisted. Verna screamed as her arm was torqued behind her back. She spun around, forced to her knees by the pressure. Now she was on the floor next to Leo. "Ray!" she screamed. "Get him off me! Hit him!" Ray roared. He charged. He was big. He was heavy. He had spent years fighting in bars and alleys. He saw a man in a suit on his knees, an easy target. He aimed a kick at Julian's ribs, a kick meant to break bone. Julian didn't panic. He didn't scramble. He let go of Verna and shifted his weight. He had grown up in boarding schools, yes, but he had spent his 20s on oil rigs and construction sites before the billions came. He knew how gravity worked. As Ray's boot came flying in, Julian caught the ankle. He didn't try to stop the kick. He guided it. He pulled. Ray, expecting resistance, found none. His momentum carried him forward. His other foot left the ground. For a second, the big man was flying. Then gravity collected its debt. Ray crashed onto the coffee table. Crash! The glass surface shattered. Bottles of Grey Goose and Hennessy exploded. The table collapsed under 300 pounds of confused muscle. Ray groaned, rolling in a soup of expensive vodka and broken glass. He tried to get up, but slipped on the alcohol and fell back down, groaning in agony. The room went silent. Julian stood up slowly. He brushed a speck of dust from his knee. He looked at the guests. 15 people, 15 witnesses. "Does anyone else want to negotiate?" Julian asked. His voice was calm. It was the voice of a man who had just realized that the monsters under the bed were made of paper and cheap threats. Nobody moved. The music was gone. The bravado was gone. There was only the sound of Ray wheezing on the floor and Verna sobbing, clutching her wrist. Julian turned back to Leo. The boy was staring at him, not with fear anymore, but with awe, as if Superman had just crashed through the ceiling. "Leo," Julian said, extending his hand. "We're leaving." "Leaving?" Leo asked, his voice trembling. "Where?" "Home," Julian said. "The real one." "I can't," Leo whispered, looking at Verna. "I have to clean the mess. If I don't clean the mess, I don't get dinner." Julian looked at the shattered table, at the spilled wine, at the chaos. He looked at Verna, who was staring up at him with hatred burning through her tears. "No," Julian said. "You're done cleaning, Leo." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out his wallet. A sleek, black leather card holder. He took out a card. It was black metal, an Amex Centurion. He dropped it on Verna's lap. "The pin is Jojo, Julian said coldly. "Buy yourself a new table. Buy yourself a lawyer. You're going to need both." He bent down and scooped Leo into his arms. The boy was light, terrifyingly light. He felt like a bundle of sticks held together by oversized clothes. Leo stiffened for a second, then melted. He wrapped his thin arms around Julian's neck. He buried his face in the wet cashmere coat. He smelled the rain. He smelled the expensive cologne. He smelled safety. Julian turned and walked toward the door. He stepped over Ray, who was still trying to figure out which way was up. He walked past the guests, who parted to let him through, heads bowed, eyes averted. They knew the party was over. Julian stepped out onto the porch. The cold air hit them. The rain was still falling, but it didn't feel like an assault anymore. It felt like a baptism. He carried his son down the stairs, his muddy shoes finding traction on the slippery wood. He walked toward the black car, waiting in the dark like a loyal beast. But as he reached for the door handle, he heard the screen door slam behind him. Verna wasn't done. "You can't take him!" she screamed from the porch, holding her injured wrist against her chest. "I have custody. I have the papers. You signed them. You gave him to me. That's kidnapping." Julian stopped. He didn't turn around. He held Leo tighter, shielding the boy's head with his hand. "Kidnapping?" Julian said to the dark street. He opened the car door and placed Leo gently on the leather seat. "Buckle up, Leo. Close your eyes." He shut the door. The sound was solid, final. Julian turned slowly to face Verna one last time. She was standing under the porch light, illuminated like a grotesque moth. "I have the papers!" she screamed again, waving a phantom document in the air. "The law is on my side!" Julian walked back to the foot of the stairs. He looked up at her. "Verna," he said. The rain ran down his face, masking the tears he refused to shed. "You're confusing the law with power." He took a step closer. "You have a piece of paper," Julian said. "I have an army of lawyers who earn more in an hour than you will see in a lifetime. I have the mayor on speed dial. I have the press waiting for a story about a grandmother who runs a sweatshop for a sick child." He pointed at the house. "By tomorrow morning, this house will be condemned. The IRS will be auditing every cent you've spent in the last decade. Child Protective Services will be asking why a boy with a psychiatric condition has malnutrition markers in his blood." Verna went pale. The reality of the machine she had engaged was finally crashing down on her. "You wanted my money?" Julian asked. "You're going to get it. I'm going to spend every single dollar I have to make sure you never see daylight again." He didn't wait for her response. There was nothing left to say. He turned his back on the house. He turned his back on the past. He got into the car. He looked at Leo. The boy was staring at the dashboard, his eyes wide, clutching the broken watch against his chest as if it were a talisman keeping the world from ending. Julian started the engine. The V8 roared to life. "Are you hungry, Leo?" Julian asked. Leo nodded. A small, jerky movement. "Good," Julian said. He put the car in gear. "Let's go get some pizza, the kind that doesn't come out of a trash can." He pressed the gas. The car surged forward, leaving the mud, the rot, and the lies behind in the rearview mirror. But as they turned the corner, leaving Oak Street, Julian knew the war wasn't over. Verna was desperate, and desperate people did dangerous things. He checked the mirror one last time. The lights in the house were still on, but the party was definitely over. The interior of the armored sedan was a capsule of silence moving through a chaotic world. Julian drove south, putting miles between them and the rotting house on Oak Street. He kept his eyes on the road, the windshield wipers slicing back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm. Swish click, swish click. Beside him in the passenger seat, Leo was sitting perfectly still. The boy wasn't leaning back against the plush leather. He was sitting on the edge of the seat, his back rigid, his hands folded tightly in his lap over the broken pocket watch. He looked like he was waiting for the ejector seat to activate. Julian glanced at the rearview mirror. No flashing lights yet. No sirens screaming his name. But he knew they were coming. Verna wouldn't just call the police. She would weaponize them. She would spin a story of a violent, estranged father snatching a mentally unstable child in the middle of the night. He needed to get Leo fed, cleaned, and hidden before the narrative spun out of control. "You can lean back, Leo," Julian said softly. "The seat is heated." Leo looked at the leather upholstery as if it were made of glass. "I'm dirty," Leo whispered. He looked down at his shorts, stained with grease and mud. "I'll ruin the car. Aunt Verna says stains don't come out. She takes it out of my allowance." Julian tightened his grip on the steering wheel until the leather creaked. "There is no allowance here, Leo," Julian said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "And cars are meant to be used. If it gets dirty, we wash it. If it stays dirty, we buy a new one." Leo looked at him, his eyes wide. The concept was alien. In his world, objects had more value than people. A stained rug was a tragedy. A bruised boy was a Tuesday. Julian pulled the car off the highway. He didn't head for the trendy, high-end districts. He found a diner. An old-school, all-night place with neon signage buzzing in the rain. The Golden Griddle. It wasn't a five-star restaurant. It was better. It was bright, warm, and smelled of bacon and coffee. Julian parked the car. "Come on," he said. Leo hesitated. "In there? With people?" "Yes. But I don't have shoes," Leo said, curling his bare, dirty toes into the car mat. Julian looked down. He had forgotten. In the rage of the extraction, he hadn't grabbed the boy's shoes, if he even had any. Julian opened his door and walked around the car. He opened the passenger door. Without a word, he unbuttoned his cashmere coat. He took it off. He wrapped the coat around Leo. The garment was massive on the boy, swallowing him whole. The silk lining alone cost more than Verna's car. Julian scooped him up again. "Now you have a cape," Julian said. "Superheroes don't need shoes." He carried his son across the wet parking lot and into the diner. The bell above the door chimed, ding-ling. The diner was mostly empty at 9:30 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday. A trucker sat at the counter nursing a coffee. A couple of teenagers huddled in a back booth. The waitress, a woman named heavy-set woman named Brenda according to her name tag, looked up. She saw a man in a soaking, wet, mud-splattered bespoke suit carrying a child wrapped in a coat that looked like it belonged on a runway. She didn't blink. She grabbed 2 menus. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, leading them to a corner booth. "Long night," Julian corrected. He slid into the booth. Leo sat opposite him, disappearing into the red vinyl seat. He kept the coat pulled tight around his neck, hiding his dirty clothes, hiding his bruises. Brenda placed the menus down. "Coffee for you? Chocolate milk for the little guy?" Leo flinched at the direct address. He looked at Julian for permission to speak. "Chocolate milk," Julian nodded. "Large, and bring a straw." When Brenda left, Julian pushed the menu toward Leo. "Pick anything," Julian said. Leo opened the laminated menu. His eyes scanned the pictures. Pancakes, burgers, omelets. He looked at the prices listed next to the items. His face fell. "It's too much," Leo whispered, pointing at a cheeseburger. $12. That's 2 hours of cleaning." Julian reached across the table. He put his hand over the prices, covering them. "Leo, look at me." The boy looked up. "Do you remember the card I gave to Verna?" Julian asked. Leo nodded. "The black metal one." "That card is magic," Julian said. He wasn't lying. In a capitalist world, the Centurion card was the closest thing to a magic wand existence allowed. It never runs out. You could order every burger in this building and the card wouldn't even notice. You don't work for food anymore. You eat because you're hungry. Leo stared at him. He was trying to process the logic shift. "Can I have the pancakes?" Leo asked tentatively. "With the face made of strawberries?" "You can have the pancakes," Julian said, "and a side of bacon and eggs." When the food arrived 10 minutes later, the smell hit the table like a physical wave: sweet syrup, salty grease, warm bread. Leo didn't eat immediately. He sat on his hands. He looked at the plate, watching the steam rise. "It's hot," Leo whispered. "Yes," Julian said, taking a sip of black coffee. "Ideally." "I usually eat later," Leo explained, his voice matter-of-fact. "After she goes to sleep. The food is cold then, but it's safer." Julian set his coffee cup down. The ceramic hit the saucer with a sharp clack. Every sentence the boy spoke was an indictment. A shard of glass in Julian's conscience. It's safer. Eating was a tactical operation for an 8-year-old. "It's safe now," Julian said. "Eat." Leo picked up his fork. His hand was shaking so badly the metal clicked against the plate. He took a bite of a strawberry. He chewed slowly, and then he stopped. Tears didn't fall. They just appeared in his eyes, magnifying the blue irises. "It tastes like real strawberries," Leo choked out. "Not the syrup kind." He began to eat. He didn't eat like a child enjoying a treat. He ate like a survivor, fast, efficient, guarding his plate with his left arm while he shoveled food with his right. He barely chewed. He was filling the tank before the food could be taken away. Julian watched him, his own appetite non-existent. He watched the syrup stain the corner of Leo's mouth. He watched the color slowly returning to the boy's pale cheeks, the sugar and protein hitting his bloodstream. Julian's phone vibrated on the table. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He knew who it was. It wasn't Verna. Verna didn't block her ID. Julian answered. "Blackwood." "Mr. Blackwood," a voice said, crisp, professional. "This is Detective Miller, Chicago PD, 4th District." Julian didn't blink. He kept watching Leo eat the pancakes. "Detective," Julian said calmly, "we received a distressed 911 call from a Ms. Verna Jefferson," the detective said. "She claims you forcibly entered her home, assaulted her, and abducted her ward, Leo Blackwood. She states she has full legal custody and a restraining order on file due to your previous medical history." The trap was sprung. Verna played the crazy father card. "I have my son," Julian said. "We are eating dinner." "Sir, I need to ask you to pull over and give us your location," Miller said. The tone shifted from polite to commanding. "An Amber Alert is being prepared. If you don't cooperate, this becomes a federal kidnapping case. You cross city lines." Julian looked out the window of the diner. The rain was still falling. "The boy was malnourished, Detective," Julian said. "I found him scrubbing floors at a party while adults kicked him. If you want to arrest someone, go back to Oak Street and look in the refrigerator, or lack thereof." "We can discuss the welfare check later, sir," Miller said. "Right now, legally, you are in violation of a custody agreement. I need you to bring the boy to the nearest precinct, tonight." "I'm not bringing him to a police station," Julian said. "He's traumatized. He needs a bed, not an interrogation room." "Sir, if you don't, I'm calling my lawyer, Alan Dershowitz." Julian lied smoothly. He didn't use Dershowitz, but the name scared cops. "He'll have a judge on the phone in 10 minutes to issue an emergency protective order against Ms. Jefferson. Until then, my son stays with me." He hung up. He immediately dialed another number. "Troy," Julian said, when his head of security answered. "I saw the alert, boss," Troy said. "It just hit the police scanner. Black armored sedan, suspect considered unstable. They're looking for you." "I need a fortress, Troy," Julian said. "I can't go to the penthouse. They'll be waiting in the lobby." "The Peninsula Hotel," Troy replied instantly. "I know the night manager. We can get you into the back elevator. No cameras, no lobby, but you need to ditch the car. It's too conspicuous." "We're at the Golden Griddle on 95th, Julian said. "I'm 5 minutes away," Troy said. "Leave the car. Take the back exit." Julian hung up. He looked at Leo. The boy had finished the pancakes. He was licking the syrup off the fork. "Leo," Julian said. Leo froze. The fork hovered in midair. "Did I eat too much? Do I have to pay?" "No," Julian said. He stood up and threw a $100 bill on the table. It was too much for a $12 meal, but he didn't have time for change. "We have to play a game," Julian said. He walked around the table and wrapped the oversized cashmere coat around the boy again. "It's called Invisible Man." Leo's eyes lit up. "I'm good at that game. I play it all the time." "I bet you do," Julian said, picking him up. "But this time, we're on the same team. We need to vanish before the bad guys find us." He carried Leo to the back of the diner. Past the kitchen, past the confused cook, they pushed through the heavy metal door into the alleyway. The rain was cold, but the air felt charged with electricity. A gray SUV pulled up to the curb instantly. The window rolled down. Troy, a massive man with a scarred eyebrow, nodded. "Get in," Troy said. "The wolves are howling tonight, Julian." Julian slid into the back seat with Leo. As the SUV pulled away, disappearing into the traffic, Julian saw a police cruiser speeding past in the opposite direction, lights flashing, siren wailing. They were heading toward the diner. Leo watched the blue and red lights through the rear window. He huddled closer to Julian. "Are they looking for me?" Leo whispered. "Because I broke the plate?" Julian put his arm around the boy's shoulders. He pulled him tight. "No, Leo," Julian said, watching the police car fade into the distance. "They're looking for me, because I broke the rules." "Are you in trouble?" Leo asked. Julian looked at his son. He looked at the syrup stain on his mouth. He looked at the broken watch clutched in his hand. "I've never been better," Julian said. But as the SUV headed toward the city center, Julian knew the easy part was over. He had the boy. Now he had to keep him. And Verna wasn't just a greedy aunt anymore. She was a cornered animal with the law on her side. Julian pulled out his phone again. He opened his banking app. He looked at his liquid assets. $200 million available for immediate transfer. He wasn't going to hire a lawyer. He was going to buy the entire legal system if he had to. "Troy," Julian said to the driver, "call the firm. Wake everyone up. I want custody papers filed in family court by 8 a.m. and get me a private investigator on Verna's medical history. I want to know every pill she's bought, every doctor she's bribed, and every lie she's told since 2015. "Consider it done," Troy said. Leo looked up at Julian. "You talk like a movie general." Julian looked down at his son. He managed a small, tired smile. "This is a war, Leo," Julian whispered, "and we just won the first battle." The gray SUV descended into the bowels of the city. They didn't go to the main entrance of the Peninsula Hotel. That was for tourists and cameras. They went to the loading dock, a cavernous concrete throat that smelled of diesel and industrial cleaner. Troy flashed a badge at the security checkpoint. The guard nodded, lifting the heavy iron gate without a word. Money didn't just buy luxury, it bought silence. The car stopped next to a service elevator. Julian opened the door. Leo had fallen asleep during the short ride, clutching the oversized cashmere coat as if it were a life raft. His breathing was shallow, a nervous, jerky rhythm that didn't stop even in unconsciousness. Julian unbuckled the boy. He slid his arms under Leo's knees and back. The boy weighed nothing. It was like carrying a hollow bird. "Troy," Julian said quietly, "secure the perimeter. No one comes up to the penthouse suite without my direct authorization. Not room service, not housekeeping, and especially not the police." "I've got 2 guys in the lobby and 1 on the fire escape," Troy said, checking his earpiece. "You're in a fortress, boss." Julian nodded and carried his son into the elevator. He pressed the button for the top floor. The machinery hummed, lifting them rapidly, leaving the mud and the sirens far below. When the doors opened, they weren't in a hotel hallway. They were in the foyer of the royal suite. The lights flickered on automatically, sensing motion. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft, warm glow over 3,000 square feet of marble and velvet. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago. The same city that looked so cold from the street now looked like a jewelry box of glittering lights. Leo stirred. He opened his eyes. He blinked, trying to process the data. "Are we in heaven?" Leo whispered. His voice was thick with sleep and confusion. "No," Julian said, walking toward the master bedroom. "We're in a hotel." "It's too big," Leo said, shrinking into Julian's chest. "I'm not allowed in the big rooms. I have to stay in the basement." "There are no basements here," Julian said firmly. "You are allowed in every room. You can jump on the sofas. You can run in the halls." He carried Leo into the bathroom. It was a sanctuary of white marble. The bathtub was massive, a deep soaking tub carved from a single block of stone. "We need to get you cleaned up," Julian said. He set Leo down on the vanity counter. The boy immediately pulled his knees up, wrapping the coat tighter. He looked at the gleaming porcelain fixtures with suspicion. "Cold water?" Leo asked. For discipline?" Julian paused while turning the gold handle of the faucet. He looked at his son in the mirror. "No discipline," Julian said, his voice cracking slightly. "Warm water, with bubbles, to get the mud off." Leo watched the steam rise from the tub. He watched Julian pour a bottle of lavender bath oil into the stream. The smell filled the room, replacing the stench of Oak Street. "Okay," Leo whispered. Julian helped him out of the coat. Then he helped him with the stained gray t-shirt. Leo lifted his arms. The shirt slid off. Julian stopped breathing. He had seen the boy's thinness. He had seen the dirt, but he hadn't seen the canvas underneath. Leo's torso was a map of neglect. His ribs pressed against his skin like the bars of a cage. His spine was a sharp ridge of knobs, but it was the colors that destroyed Julian. There were bruises. Some yellow, old and fading, some purple, fresh and angry. There was a mark on his shoulder that looked like the shape of a hand. There was a scrape on his hip, likely from falling on a rough floor. Julian stared at the handprint. It was small, too small for Ray. It was Verna's hand. A rage, darker and colder than anything he had felt at the house, settled in Julian's marrow. He wanted to scream. He wanted to burn the city down, but he couldn't. Not now. Leo was watching him, gauging his reaction. If Julian got angry, Leo would think the anger was directed at him. Julian forced his face into a mask of calm. He swallowed the scream. "The water is ready," Julian said softly. Leo climbed into the tub. He hissed when the warm water touched his skin, then relaxed. He sank down until the bubbles covered his chin. The water began to turn gray immediately. The grime of the house, the grease of the floors, the mud of the yard, it all dissolved into the lavender foam. Julian rolled up his sleeves. He knelt by the tub. He picked up a soft sponge. "I'm going to wash your hair," Julian said. "Close your eyes." Leo obeyed. He squeezed his eyes shut tight, anticipating soap sting. Julian worked the shampoo into the matted curls. He was gentle, his fingers massaging the scalp that had likely never known a tender touch. He washed away the dirt. He washed away the smell of stale smoke. "Daddy?" Leo asked, his eyes still closed. The word hung in the humid air. It was the first time he had said it without a question mark. "Yes, Leo." "Did you really throw my watch away?" Leo asked. "Aunt Verna said you looked at it and laughed. She said you called it trash. That's why I had to fix it, to show you it wasn't trash." Julian's hands froze in the soapy water. He remembered the night his wife died. He remembered the watch sitting on the bedside table. He remembered sweeping his arm across the surface in a fit of grief, sending everything crashing to the floor. He hadn't laughed. He had been screaming in agony. He hadn't thrown it away. He had been too broken to pick it up. Verna had taken that moment of grief and twisted it into a weapon. She had told the boy that his father hated him, using a broken object as proof. "I never laughed," Julian whispered. He rinsed the soap from Leo's hair with a cup of warm water. "I was sad. I was very, very sad. And when you're sad, sometimes you break things by accident. But I never wanted to throw it away, and I certainly never wanted to throw you away." Leo opened his eyes. The water dripped from his eyelashes. "She said I was the reason Mom died," Leo said. "Because I cost too much money. Because I needed too much attention." Julian dropped the sponge. He grabbed a towel from the heated rack. It was warm, fluffy, white. "Stand up, Leo." Leo stood. Water cascaded off his thin frame. Julian wrapped him in the towel. He pulled him out of the tub and held him. He didn't care about his wet shirt. He hugged the boy tight, burying his face in the clean, damp hair. "Listen to me," Julian said, his voice vibrating against Leo's ear. "Your mother loved you more than anything. You were the best thing that ever happened to us. You didn't cost anything. You gave us everything." He pulled back and looked Leo in the eye. "Verna lied," Julian said. "She lied about the watch. She lied about the money. She lied about me. And she lied about you. You are not a burden. You are my son." Leo stared at him. The programming of 8 years didn't vanish instantly, but a crack appeared in the wall Verna had built. "Okay," Leo whispered. "I believe you." He reached out from the towel bundle. "Where is my watch?" Julian picked up the broken Waltham from the marble counter where he had placed it for safety. He handed it to Leo. Leo clutched it. His breathing slowed down. The totem was safe. He was safe. "Come," Julian said. "Let's get you into bed." 10 minutes later, Leo was buried under a duvet made of Egyptian cotton. He looked tiny in the king-sized bed. The watch was tucked under his pillow. His eyes were heavy, fighting a losing battle against exhaustion. "Will you stay?" Leo asked. "Until I sleep?" "I'm not going anywhere," Julian said. He pulled a chair next to the bed. He watched Leo drift off. The boy's hand was still under the pillow, holding the watch. When Leo's breathing finally evened out into a deep, rhythmic sleep, Julian stood up. He walked out of the bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar so he could hear any sound. He walked into the living area of the suite. Troy was there. He was standing by the dining table, which was now covered in laptops, tablets, and stacks of paper. Troy looked up. His face was grim. "He asleep?" Troy asked. "Yes," Julian said. He walked over to the mini bar and poured himself a glass of water. His hands were steady now. The rage had calcified into strategy. "What do you have?" Troy turned a laptop screen toward Julian. "I ran the financials you asked for," Troy said, "and I got the PI to dig into Verna's medical claims." Julian leaned over the screen. The light from the monitor reflected in his eyes. "It's worse than we thought," Troy said. "She didn't just steal the stipend. She created a whole industry around him." Troy pointed to a column of numbers. "Here, Dr. Eris Thorne. She paid him $5,000 a month for consultations. I looked him up. He lost his license in 2018 for writing fake prescriptions. He's been signing off on Leo's psychotic episodes without ever seeing the kid." Julian scanned the document. "And here," Troy continued, scrolling down, "the specialized nutrition. She was billing you for medical-grade supplements imported from Europe. But looking at her credit card statement, the money went to Lux Casino in Gary, Indiana, and Saks Fifth Avenue, and a damn Mercedes dealership." Julian saw the dates, the amounts. While Leo was eating scraps and cleaning floors, Verna was losing Julian's money at blackjack tables and buying handbags. "And the custody papers?" Julian asked. "That's the kicker," Troy said. He opened a PDF. "She told the police she has full custody. She doesn't. You signed a temporary guardianship order 8 years ago when you were in the hospital after the funeral." Julian remembered. The fog of grief, the sedatives, Verna pushing a paper in front of him saying it was just for school registration. "It expired 5 years ago," Troy said. "She's been running this con on expired paperwork. Legally, she has zero claim. She's technically a kidnapper, holding a child for ransom." Julian straightened up. "But the police don't know that yet," Julian said. "They see an Amber Alert. They see a distraught grandmother. They see a billionaire who hasn't seen his kid in years." "Exactly," Troy said. "If the cops find you tonight, they take Leo. They put him in emergency foster care or give him back to Verna until a judge sorts it out on Monday. You can't let them take him back, Julian. If he goes back to that house, even for one night." "He's not going back," Julian said. He walked to the window. He looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, Verna was probably giving an interview to the local news, crying crocodile tears. "What time do the courts open?" Julian asked. 8 a.m., Troy said. "But Verna will be there at 7 with her fake doctor and her fake tears." "Good," Julian said. He turned away from the window. He looked at the pile of evidence on the table, the fraud, the fake doctor, the casino debts, the abuse. "Troy," Julian said, "call the pilot. Tell him to prep the helicopter." "We're running?" Troy asked, confused. "No," Julian said. "We're not running. We're attacking." He picked up the tablet showing the picture of Dr. Eris Thorne. "Find this doctor," Julian commanded. "Tonight. Pull him out of bed. Pull him out of a bar. I don't care. Offer him a choice. He can testify against Verna tomorrow morning and keep his freedom, or he can go to federal prison for medical fraud and child endangerment. Tell him Julian Blackwood is making the offer personally." Troy smiled. It was a shark smile. "I know where he lives." "Get him," Julian said, "and call the network. I want a press conference set up on the courthouse steps at 7:45 a.m. If Verna wants a media circus, let's give her one." Julian walked back toward the bedroom door. He looked in at his sleeping son. Leo was safe, clean, warm. But the war wasn't won yet. Tomorrow, Julian wouldn't just be a father, he would be a hurricane. "Get some rest, Troy," Julian said softly. "Tomorrow, we burn the witch." The sun rose over Lake Michigan like a bruised eye, casting a pale gray light over the steel canyons of Chicago. It was 6:30 in the morning. In the royal suite of the Peninsula Hotel, the air was quiet, smelling of fresh coffee and expensive wool. Julian Blackwood stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror. He wasn't wearing the mud-stained suit from the night before. That suit was in the trash, incinerated along with the man he used to be. Today he wore charcoal gray, a three-piece armor cut with razor-sharp precision. The fabric absorbed the light, making him look like a shadow that had learned to stand upright. He adjusted his tie, a Windsor knot, tight, symmetrical. "Turn around," Julian said softly. Behind him, standing on a velvet ottoman, was Leo. The transformation was startling. The oversized, stained t-shirt was gone. The frayed shorts were gone. Leo was wearing a miniature version of Julian's armor, a navy blue blazer, crisp white shirt, and beige chinos. Troy had procured the clothes at 4 in the morning from a personal shopper who didn't ask questions. Leo looked at himself in the mirror. He touched the lapel of the jacket. He touched the clean, combed hair. He looked at his feet. Wearing new leather loafers not bare and dirty, he didn't recognize the boy in the glass. The sick boy was gone. The thief was gone. "Do I have to give them back?" Leo whispered, his hand trembling slightly as he smoothed the fabric. "After the meeting?" Julian turned. He placed his hands on Leo's shoulders. He felt the thin bones underneath the wool, but they felt stronger today. Or maybe it was just the posture. "They are yours, Leo," Julian said. "Everything you see is yours. You never have to give anything back again." The door to the suite opened. Troy walked in. He looked tired. He had bags under his eyes, dark enough to carry luggage, but he was smiling. A feral, satisfied smile. "It's done," Troy said. "The package is secure." He sang like a canary in a coal mine. "We have the affidavit, the video confession, and the man himself waiting in the van." "And Verna?" Julian asked, buttoning his jacket. "She's there," Troy said, checking his phone. "She's been there since 6 a.m. She brought a choir, Julian, literally. She has a church group praying on the steps, and the press is eating it up. Channel 5, Channel 9, CNN. She's playing the grieving grandmother of a kidnapped child perfectly." Julian checked his watch. The Patek Philippe gleamed under the chandelier. "Let her play," Julian said cold. "The higher she climbs, the harder she falls." He extended his hand to Leo. "Are you ready, Leo?" Leo looked at the hand. He looked at the broken pocket watch that was now safely tucked into his new pants pocket. He took a deep breath. "Is the bad lady going to be there?" Leo asked. "Yes," Julian said, "but she can't touch you. Remember the game? You're invisible to her. She can't see you unless you want her to." Leo nodded. He took his father's hand. His grip was tight. "Let's go," Julian said. The Cook County Courthouse was a fortress of stone, a monument to the idea of justice that often failed to deliver the reality of it. By 7:45 a.m., the wide stone steps were a circus. Reporters jockeyed for position, their cameras creating a wall of glass lenses. Microphones were thrust into the air like spears. And in the center of the storm, standing on a podium usually reserved for mayors and senators, was Verna Jefferson. She was dressed for the role of a lifetime. She wore a modest black dress, high-necked, signifying mourning and piety. She held a handkerchief to her dry eyes. Behind her, a group of women from a local church stood in solidarity, holding signs that read, "Bring Leo home and stop billionaire bullies." Verna leaned into the bank of microphones. "He thinks he can buy anything," Verna wailed, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "He abandoned that boy for 8 years. 8 years I wiped his tears. 8 years I fed him and clothed him while his father was living in a penthouse." The cameras flashed, click, click, click. The shutter sounds were like applause. "And now," Verna continued, pointing a trembling finger at the sky, "now he storms into my home. He hurts me. Look at this." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a bandage on her wrist where Julian had grabbed her. It was wrapped thick, suggesting a broken bone, though it was just a bruise. "He kidnapped my baby," she screamed. "Leo is sick. He needs his medication. He needs stability. Julian Blackwood is a monster who thinks the law doesn't apply to him." The crowd murmured in agreement. The narrative was compelling. The evil, absent rich father versus the saintly, poor grandmother. It was David and Goliath, scripted for the morning news. Detective Miller stood off to the side, looking uncomfortable. He had the Amber Alert active, but something about Verna's performance was grating on him. It felt too rehearsed, too polished. "Bring him back!" Verna shouted, looking directly into the camera lens. "Julian, if you're watching, please, don't hurt him. Just bring him back to the only mother he's ever known." Then, the sound changed. It started as a low thrumming, vibrating the pavement. Then it became a roar. Heads turned, cameras swiveled. A motorcade was approaching. It wasn't a police car. It wasn't a taxi. It was a phalanx of 3 black, armored Cadillac Escalades. They moved in perfect formation, parting the traffic like a knife through water. They didn't slow down for the press. They owned the street. The SUVs pulled up to the curb right in front of the courthouse steps, blocking the view of Verna's pity party. The doors of the lead and rear vehicles opened first. Security guards poured out, big men who wore earpieces and moved with military precision. They formed a perimeter instantly, pushing the press back, creating a sterile corridor from the middle car to the stairs. The crowd went silent. The sheer display of power was mesmerizing. Then the door of the middle SUV opened. Julian Blackwood stepped out. He stood on the pavement for a second, adjusting his cuffs. He looked up at Verna, perched 20 steps above him. He didn't look angry. He looked like an exterminator arriving at an infestation. He turned back to the car and reached in. He pulled Leo out. The crowd gasped. They expected a terrified, crying child dragged by a monster. Instead, they saw a boy in a perfectly tailored blazer, holding his father's hand, walking with a shy but steady gait. He didn't look sick. He didn't look unstable. He looked well cared for. Verna saw him. Her eyes widened. The narrative was cracking. "Leo!" she shrieked, breaking character. She started to run down the stairs, her arms outstretched, her face twisting into a mask of desperate possession. "Leo! Baby! Run to Auntie! Run away from him!" Leo stopped. He squeezed Julian's hand. Julian didn't move. He stood his ground, a pillar of charcoal wool. Verna crashed into the wall of security guards. 2 men blocked her path without touching her, just using their masks to stop her momentum. "Let me through!" Verna screamed. "That's my son! He kidnapped him! Officer! Officer! Arrest him!" Detective Miller stepped forward, hand on his belt. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice booming over the noise, "you are in violation of a custody order. I need you to hand over the child." Julian looked at the detective. Then he looked at the bank of microphones Verna had just vacated. "I don't think so, Detective," Julian said. His voice wasn't shouted, but in the silence of the crowd, it carried. He walked past the detective. He walked past Verna, ignoring her screaming. He walked up the stairs, pulling Leo with him, until he reached the microphones. He picked up the central mic. "My name is Julian Blackwood," he said. The speakers echoed his voice across the plaza. "And for 8 years, I have been the victim of a crime, but I was not the only victim." He looked down at Leo. "This boy," Julian said, "was held prisoner, not by bars, but by lies." Verna was screaming from the bottom of the stairs. "Don't listen to him! He's lying! He's trying to buy his way out!" Julian reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen and held it up to the nearest camera. "Detective Miller," Julian said, "you might want to see this before you arrest anyone." On the screen, a video began to play. It was grainy, shot in the back of a van only an hour ago. A man was sitting in a chair, sweating profusely. He looked like a rat caught in a glue trap. "State your name," Troy's voice asked from off-camera in the video. "Dr. Eris Thorne," the man stuttered. "Are you Leo Blackwood's doctor?" "Technically, yes, on paper." "Have you ever examined Leo Blackwood?" "No," the man whispered. "Never." The crowd gasped. The church group lowered their signs. "Why did you prescribe antipsychotic medication for a child you never saw?" Troy asked in the video. "She paid me," Thorne said, tears leaking from his eyes. "Verna. She paid me $5,000 a month. She said she needed the diagnosis to keep the father away. She said if the boy was sick, the father would keep sending checks. She needed the money for the casino." Julian lowered the tablet. The silence on the courthouse steps was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging in the air. Every camera turned to Verna. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was frozen. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue melting in the heat. That's a deep fake," Verna stammered, her voice weak. "That's AI! He made it up!" Julian signaled to Troy, who was standing by the SUVs. Troy opened the back door of the rear vehicle. A man stepped out. He was handcuffed. It was Dr. Aris Thorne, in the flesh. "Is he AI, Verna?" Julian asked from the podium. Verna looked at Thorne. Thorne looked at the ground, unable to meet her eyes. The game was over. The script was burned. Detective Miller looked at Verna. He looked at the video evidence. He looked at the doctor in cuffs. He took his hand off his belt and reached for his handcuffs. "Verna Jefferson," Miller said, walking toward her. "You are under arrest for fraud, child endangerment, and extortion." Verna tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. She took 2 steps back, stumbled in her heels, and fell onto the cold stone steps. She scrambled backward, crawling like a crab. "No, no!" she screamed. "I took care of him. I saved him. He owes me. You all owe me." She looked up at Leo. "Leo," she begged, tell them how much I love you. Tell them about the dinners. Tell them about the clothes." Leo looked down from the top of the stairs. He looked at the woman who had forced him to eat in the dark, the woman who had made him scrub floors while she drank wine. He let go of Julian's hand. He walked to the microphone. He was too short to reach it, so Julian lowered it for him. Leo looked at Verna. "You didn't love me," Leo said into the mic. His voice was small, but it was clear. It was the voice of the truth. "You just loved the checks." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the broken pocket watch. "And you lied," Leo said. "My dad didn't throw me away." He held up the watch. The sun caught the cracked glass, making it shine like a diamond. "He was just waiting for me to fix it." Verna collapsed. She sobbed, a raw, ugly sound, as Detective Miller clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists. The crowd erupted, not with applause, but with the roar of justice being served. The church group turned their backs on her. The reporters shouted questions she couldn't answer. Julian picked Leo up. "It's over, Leo," Julian whispered into his ear. "The Invisible Man won." He turned away from the scene of Verna being dragged into a squad car. He walked back toward the SUVs, carrying his son, while the flashbulbs popped around them like fireworks celebrating a liberation. But Julian wasn't done yet. Verna was going to prison. But the system that allowed this to happen? He was going to burn that down next. The armored Cadillac Escalade merged onto Lakeshore Drive, leaving the chaos of the courthouse behind. The flashing bulbs of the paparazzi faded into the distance, replaced by the calm gray expanse of Lake Michigan rolling against the concrete shore. Inside the car, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was the silence of a library after closing time, or a church after the bells have stopped ringing. Julian loosened his tie. He unbuttoned his collar. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air conditioning that didn't smell like a courtroom or a rotting house. He looked at Leo. The boy was sitting in the middle of the back seat, still wearing his miniature navy blazer. He was holding the broken pocket watch in both hands, turning it over and over. Click, click, click. He was winding it, a nervous habit. But he wasn't looking out the window for enemies. He was just looking at the gear moving inside the cracked glass. "Did they take her away forever?" Leo asked. He didn't look up. "For a very long time," Julian answered. "Long enough that you will be a grown man before she sees the sky again. And even then, she will never know where you are." Leo nodded slowly. He stopped winding the watch. "She looked small," Leo whispered. "On the stairs, when she fell down. She always looked big in the house, like a giant, but she looked small." "Fear makes monsters look big," Julian said, reaching over to rest his hand on Leo's shoulder. "Truth makes them look small. And today, you told the truth." The car turned into the private entrance of the Blackwood Tower. The gate rose. They descended into the garage. This time, there was no rush, no Troy shouting orders, no hiding in service elevators. Julian opened the car door for his son. They walked to the main elevator. Julian pressed the button for the penthouse. When the doors opened, the apartment was flooded with morning light. The sun had finally broken through the Chicago clouds, turning the glass walls into sheets of gold. But something was different. During the hour they were at the courthouse, Julian had sent a text to his staff. The long mahogany table in the dining room, the one Julian used to eat at alone, was set for two. But not at opposite ends. The placemats were right next to each other. And in the center of the table there wasn't a crystal vase with flowers. There was a tower of Lego blocks, a brand new, unopened box of the Millennium Falcon set. Leo stopped in the foyer. He looked at the box. "Is that for work?" Leo asked. Julian laughed. It was a genuine sound, rusty but real. "No, Leo, that's for us. But it's a big project. It has 7,000 pieces. It might take us all weekend." Leo's eyes widened. "We can do it? Here? On the table?" "We can do it anywhere we want," Julian said. "This is your house, Leo. You don't live in the basement. You live everywhere." 3 months later, the office on the 40th floor didn't look like an aquarium anymore. It looked like a workshop. The air conditioning was still humming, but the sterile silence was gone. It had been replaced by the sound of a small, battery-operated drill and the low murmur of a baseball game playing on the radio. Julian Blackwood sat at his desk, but the desk wasn't covered in contracts. It was covered in blueprints for a treehouse. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a cashmere sweater with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. There was a smudge of graphite on his cheek. "Hand me the 3 4-inch screw, please," a voice said from under the desk. Julian leaned over. Leo was lying on his back under the massive mahogany desk, tightening a loose bolt on the chair leg. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that fit him perfectly. His cheeks were rounder now. The hollow, starved look was gone, replaced by the healthy glow of a boy who ate pancakes whenever he wanted. Julian handed him the screw. "You know we could just buy a new chair," Julian said, smiling. "No," Leo's voice echoed from underneath. "This one is good leather. It just squeaks. If we fix the tension spring, it's good for another 10 years. You don't throw things away just because they squeak, Dad." "Dad!" The word still hit Julian in the chest every time. It was better than any dividend check he had ever cashed. Leo slid out from under the desk. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag, a clean rag, not a dirty one, and sat up. He held up the screwdriver like Excalibur. "Fixed," Leo declared. "Sit down. Test it." Julian sat. He spun the chair. He leaned back. Silence. The squeak was gone. "Perfect," Julian said. "You have a gift, Leo. It's just mechanics. Leo shrugged, but he was beaming. Everything has a logic if you look close enough. The intercom on the desk buzzed. Mr. Blackwood? It was his assistant, Sarah. The board of directors is on line 1. They're asking about the acquisition of the Tokyo firm. They say it's urgent. Julian looked at the blinking red light on the phone. Then he looked at Leo. The boy was looking at the treehouse blueprint spread across the desk. He was already calculating the load-bearing capacity of the oak tree in the backyard of the summer house they had bought in the Hamptons. Julian pressed the intercom button. "Tell them I'm in a meeting," Julian said. "When should I tell them to call back?" Sarah asked. Julian looked at the Lego Millennium Falcon displayed on the shelf. He looked at the new color in his son's face. He looked at the peace that had finally settled over the room. "Tell them to call back on Monday," Julian said. "Or never. If they can't make a decision without me, I don't need to buy the company." He hung up. Leo looked at him. "Was that important money?" "It was just money," Julian said. "Money is easy, Leo. Anyone can make money if they don't care about anything else. What we're doing here, building things, that's the hard part." Julian opened the top drawer of his desk. It was no longer locked. He pulled out a small square box made of glass and walnut wood. He placed it on the center of the desk, right on top of the billion-dollar blueprints. Inside the case, resting on a velvet cushion, was the Waltham pocket watch. It was still cracked. Julian hadn't replaced the glass. He hadn't polished the brass scratches. He hadn't replaced the paperclip gear that Leo had installed. He had kept it exactly as it was. "Why do you keep it in the box?" Leo asked, touching the glass. "It's broken." "It's not broken," Julian said softly. "It tells the time perfectly." He tapped the glass. "I keep it there to remind me," Julian said. "I looked at this watch for years and only saw trash. You looked at it and saw something worth saving. You saw potential where I saw damage." Julian stood up and walked around the desk. He picked up Leo and sat him on the edge of the mahogany surface. "You fixed me, Leo," Julian whispered, "just like you fixed the watch. I was ticking, but I wasn't working. I was just moving forward without knowing why." Leo leaned his head against Julian's shoulder. "You're working now, Dad," Leo said. Julian hugged him. He smelled the sawdust and the expensive soap and the boyish sweat of a hard day's play. Outside the window, the sun began to set over Chicago. The city lights flickered on one by one. Down there, in the streets, people were rushing, chasing money, chasing status, believing the lie that happiness was a number on a bank account. Julian Blackwood had believed that lie for 40 years. But as he held his son in the golden light of the office, listening to the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the paperclip watch inside the glass case, he finally knew the truth. He wasn't the invisible man anymore. He was seen. And for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Come on," Julian said, hopping off the desk. "We have a treehouse to design, and I think we're going to need more pizza." Leo grinned. "Can we get the one with the pepperoni? The greasy kind?" "The greasier the better," Julian said. He grabbed his jacket from the coat rack, but he didn't put it on. He threw it over his shoulder, careless, free. He switched off the office lights. In the darkness, the only thing that shone was the city outside, and the small, cracked watch on the desk, beating steadily, marking the beginning of time that actually mattered. "We spend our lives building fortunes,"